Once you decide you are ready to have a baby, you can want it to happen fast. I want you to avoid these 5 common mistakes that I wish my patients knew sooner. If you want to get pregnant fast, watch this video to avoid these 5 common mistakes. I'm Dr. Laura Shaheen. I'm a double board certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinologist helping people build families and avoid mistakes for almost 20 years. If this is your first time finding this channel, welcome. I love educating. Be sure and subscribe to this channel so you get my weekly video on reproductive health. And if you're coming back to the channel to learn more, welcome back. I'm so glad you're here. No matter if you're new or if you are returning, be sure and like this video, comment with questions or topics you want me to cover, and as always, follow, subscribe so that you can get my weekly videos. We can spend a lot of time worrying about getting pregnant before we are ready. But when you decide that you want a baby, you can want it to happen fast. I am going to share with you in this video 5 common mistakes I see my own patients make when they're trying to conceive. And if you avoid these mistakes, there's a real chance you could get pregnant faster. Be sure and stick around to the end of this video, and I'm also going to give you 3 important tips that will help you on your family building journey. Let's get started. Mistake number 1, not knowing what a normal period is. I know the word normal is frustrating, but you've got to know what is normal and what is typical for a period in order to get pregnant. You also have to know what's abnormal and when to see a doctor and figure out what's wrong to help you get pregnant faster. I have a whole video here on YouTube that really explains what is typical for a menstrual cycle, and make sure you watch that video for details. But in general, you have to be ovulating and getting a period about once a month in order to have the opportunity to get pregnant. And typically, if people are having regular, approximately monthly menstrual cycles, then they are ovulating about once a month as well. So the menstrual cycle in general, the first half is that egg maturing and getting ready. In the middle of the cycle, it ovulates. It should go into the fallopian tube, meet the sperm, hopefully fertilize, become an embryo, and implant into the uterine cavity. The second half of the cycle is waiting to see if that implantation happens. And if you are not pregnant, all the hormone levels drop and you get a period. So people who say, I never know when my period's coming, or, I stopped oral birth control pills and I haven't gotten a period, it's been 3 or 6 months. Or if they say, yeah, I can just kind of bleed anytime, even 2 times in a month, that is not normal. And you should see a doctor, do some hormone levels, do some anatomy studies, make sure you understand what's going on, because you are going to not get pregnant fast enough if you are not able to time trying. So learn about your cycle, follow your cycle, chart, make sure that you're ovulating, and that will help you get pregnant faster. I had a patient just last week who had not gotten a period for 6 months after stopping her birth control pills. She was convinced that she must be pregnant, but honestly, she has PCOS. And I diagnosed it. We talked about how that can really disrupt ovulation, and we're going to work on simple ways to help get her ovaries to ovulate on a regular basis. And I hope she gets pregnant with just that intervention. But I'm so glad that she came to see me after 6 months and didn't wait a whole year to figure out what was going on. Mistake number 2, waiting until a sure sign of ovulation before trying to conceive. Now, what I mean is there are people that are waiting until they get a positive ovulation predictor kit, or waiting until they see a change in their basal body temperature, or waiting to see sure changes in their cervical mucus in order to have intercourse, in order to try. And this is a mistake because we can sometimes miss the signs of ovulation. And if we're just waiting to try, we can miss the opportunity of getting pregnant in that cycle. So sometimes the ovulation predictor kits don't work. You only increase your basal body temperature after you ovulate. It's the rise in progesterone that causes the change in that temperature. And waiting until you see that rise, it may be too late. And then sometimes we'll see cervical mucus changes and sometimes we won't. But waiting until you're absolutely sure that you've ovulated before you have intercourse is an absolute mistake. I talk about this in a video on how to know if you're ovulating. I've got another video on kind of 5 common questions about ovulation. It is important to figure out and chart and know when you're ovulating, but you've got to realize that the fertile window or the time in the cycle to have intercourse and try to get pregnant is actually the 6 days leading up to and including ovulation. And so you actually want to have intercourse a couple of times in that week leading up to the signs of ovulation in order to make sure that there is sperm in the reproductive tract ready for the egg. The egg ovulates and is available to fertilize and be viable for about 12 to 24 hours after ovulation. Sperm is viable and in the reproductive tract and able to look for and find and fertilize the egg for up to 5 days after intercourse. And so there's more of an overlap in ovulation and sperm exposure than most people realize. And you don't have to save it up and try to get it in this magic window. You can actually have a little bit of overlap. And I tell my patients to have intercourse 2 or 3 times in that week leading up to and including ovulation, and you should have sperm exposure when it is optimal. Mistake number 3, not getting the semen analysis. This is something that I cannot emphasize enough. Male factor is common. Up to 50% of the time in couples that are infertile, there's a male factor component. People's fertility can change. If you've caused a pregnancy in the past or had a baby in the past, that does not mean that your current sperm count is normal. Medications can change sperm count. Infections can change sperm count. It can absolutely change over time. You can have a low sperm count or low motility or even azospermia, which is no sperm in the ejaculate with no symptoms. You can have totally normal sex life, drive, ejaculation, and unless you look at that sperm under the microscope, you cannot be sure that there is absolutely sperm there. Do not skip this test. And don't allow somebody to say, oh, it's awkward or it's embarrassing. I really don't want to go to the clinic and collect or something like that. It just, I've caused, pregnancies in the past, or, oh, I'm really healthy. Don't do this. Don't skip it. And I really, really insist on my patients doing a semen analysis before we start doing fertility treatments. I learned my lessons years and years and years ago as a very young doctor and a patient whose partner just had pregnancies with a previous partner and just said, I'm fine. I don't want to get a semen analysis. And I never actually talked to him. Partners are always welcome to visits in my clinic. I think it's great. We're talking together as a team. It takes 2 to make a baby, but he never came to the visits and he was always very reluctant and the patient was just very convincing. She was also having ovulatory issues, so I started giving her some medication to help her ovulate on a regular basis. Long story short, I kept asking about it. Months and months went by. He finally got a semen analysis and he was azospermic. No sperm in the ejaculate. Sent him to a reproductive urologist. We figured it out, but just don't make this mistake. The patient was like, oh my gosh, I just wasted months of my life before I even got to you and after taking all this medication. And I just assumed that everything was fine because he'd had pregnancies in the past. So don't make this mistake. I have a couple of videos here on preparing for a semen analysis and then after you get the results, how to interpret them. And I've got a whole playlist here on male factor fertility, lifestyle optimization, supplements, etc. So guys, you are 50% of the genetic equation. Sperm is extremely important for fertility, and we cannot leave men out of this discussion. And just really, really important to get the testing and think about optimizing the male part of this whole fertility journey. Mistake number 4, waiting too long to see a fertility specialist. I see this all the time. People say, gosh, I just wish I'd come to see you sooner. Part of it is fear of the unknown. People don't know me, they think, this fertility doctor is just going to push IVF or isn't going to really listen to me. I mean, it's a new person kind of coming into a pretty vulnerable situation. Sometimes patients just really just want to try one more month, and they stick with the doctor that they know, primary care doctor, their OBGYN, that doctor wants to help, wants to keep it low tech. But there's a whole specialty of fertility for a reason. I often will find things that the other doctors didn't think about. I've actually had primary care doctors prescribing testosterone to their male patients in order to improve the sperm count. And that is the opposite of what you want to do. Testosterone actually makes the testicles lazy. If you're taking testosterone with pills and shots and creams, whatever, it can make you feel better. It can improve your, symptoms. But if the testicles are like, oh, we're seeing testosterone from somewhere else, they're going to get lazy. And if testicles aren't making testosterone, they are also not going to make sperm. So it will actually lower sperm counts, or even I've seen it shut down sperm production for a while. It'll often come back, but just don't wait too long to see a fertility specialist. Maybe you are just reluctant to make that appointment, but you know what? There can be wait lists. For us right now, it's like months of waiting sometimes. And so what I would love for you to do is to make an appointment with a fertility specialist and then cancel it because you are pregnant. But if you aren't, you've got that appointment waiting for you. You're taking charge, advocating for your care, making sure you're getting all the information you need in order to help you understand your personal situation. I've got a great video here on how to find the right fertility doctor for you. Mistake number 5 is assuming that your previous fertility or your family's fertility story is your current situation. Let me explain. So this can come in a couple of different scenarios. A lot of times people say, oh my gosh, everyone in my family gets pregnant in their 40s. The women in my family are so fertile. They just look at their partners and they're pregnant. I am sure I'm going to be fine. I am sure I'm going to be able to wait until in my 40s to have a baby because that's what happened to my family. Now, that could absolutely be possible, but your family's fertility is not necessarily yours. And there's another person in this equation. If you have eggs, the person who has sperm might not necessarily be fertile. So just don't delay too long, testing, asking questions just because your family was fertile. On the flip side, hopefully this is reassuring. If your family has fertility issues, multiple miscarriages or long time to pregnancy or needing fertility treatment, that also doesn't mean that you are going to be infertile. So just your family's story is not necessarily yours. This can also extend personally. So a very common scenario is a couple conceives very easily the first time. Within the first month, they weren't even trying, or they, got pregnant on birth control or whatever. Just conceive very, very easily, have a great pregnancy, have their first baby, and they're ready to start trying again to add to their family. And it just doesn't happen. So it doesn't happen the first month, like, okay, all right. Doesn't happen the second month, third month, a year goes by. There's people who sometimes conceive their first very easily, are stuck in that narrative. Secondary infertility or difficulty adding to your family is very common. It's something that I experienced. I got to experience primary infertility and secondary infertility, but that secondary infertility can be real and very difficult for people who had had no issues getting pregnant before. And it doesn't mean that you have to rush to treatment, but you should get a checkup. Sperm counts can change, egg age and sperm and quality can change, anatomy can change. Like, it's just important to not make an assumption and get stuck in the narrative that your previous fertility or your family's fertility is your current fertility situation. Now, I've got a whole playlist here all about fertility treatment, optimizing lifestyle, so much information where you can learn and really do a deep dive into a lot of topics to learn all about fertility. I really hope that that's helpful. Okay, so before I get to those 3 top tips, let's recap the 5 mistakes that we covered today. Mistake number 1, not knowing what a normal period is like and figuring out when you're ovulating. Mistake number 2, waiting to try or to have intercourse until you're absolutely sure that you have ovulated and then missing the opportunity that cycle because you waited too long. Mistake number 3, not getting a semen analysis. If I had to choose one fertility test in a couple that is the least expensive, least invasive, and highest yield, it's a semen analysis. Do not skip the semen analysis. Mistake number 4, waiting too long to see a fertility specialist. I have trained so long to be in this position. And primary doctors are amazing, OBGYNs are amazing, but they really just don't focus on fertility. So just don't avoid making that appointment with a fertility specialist for too long. We really are here to help. And mistake number 5, assuming that your previous fertility or your family's fertility is your current situation. No assumptions. Now, 3 top tips for getting pregnant fast. Number 1, learn your menstrual cycle. Kind of goes in with the first mistake that we talked about. There's a wonderful resource, Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Toni Weschler. This woman, who happens to be a dear friend of mine, actually changed the knowledge of an entire generation. Her book is almost 25 years from first publication, and it's been translated into multiple languages worldwide. It has taught so many people about their own cycle, how to tell if they're ovulating, understanding basal body temperatures, just really, really learning all of those things about your cycle that we should have learned in health class, but we didn't. I have a great interview with Toni Weschler, episode number 50 on my Baby or Bust Fertility podcast. I'd love for you to listen to that to just understand how inspirational and game-changing this woman was for a generation of women to understand their fertility. So top tip, learn your own menstrual cycle. Tip number 2, get testing early. Do not wait. I know that the textbooks say if you are under the age of 30, if you have eggs and you're under the age of 35, that you should try for a year before you get testing. And then if you're 35 years or older, you should wait for 6 months of trying and then get testing. This is a general recommendation, and this does not have to be you. I do not think that you have to wait, especially if you have irregular cycles, if you have chronic medical illnesses, if you're taking medication to figure out if you should continue or not. If there's any reason, if your family has fertility issues, if you know you have a history of endometriosis, PCOS, thyroid disease, just any reason there, and just maybe just to get testing and make sure everything is okay before you waste precious time. Tip number 2 is get tested. And finally, tip number 3 is really focus on lifestyle optimization and think about it as improving your overall health and well-being. If your health and well-being is optimized, your fertility, your reproductive health is going to be optimized. And I have a whole playlist here and deep dives into sleep, nutrition, exercise, stress management. All of these things are incredibly important, but I also really caution you that caring for these things does not mean restriction, self-blame, or this spiral that we can sometimes get into. I am on the 80% fertility plan. If 80% of the time you can be getting great sleep, you can eat nutritious food, you can avoid toxins as best that you can exercise in a healthy way. 80% of the time you can really make solid, healthy choices. You are doing great. You are in perfection. So being healthy does not mean taking away things that you enjoy. Make sure that you're focused on health, not necessarily restricting and getting into that shame spiral. It's really, really important. I hope you learned something from this video today. Like this video if you learned something. Comment with questions that you have. Be sure and subscribe to this channel so you get my weekly video on reproductive health. And as always, wishing you love, luck, and pineapples.